HOA used the wrong yard for their overflow parking. What they didn't know, that trucking yard was sacred ground. DOT doesn't ask twice when the paperwork's clean, and every car on that lot was out before sunrise. Now the yard's empty, the lot's sealed, and HOA pays for every tire track they left behind. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was my dad's land, and for them, it was just extra parking. There's a certain silence that hangs in a trucking yard when the engines go still. Not the kind of silence that comforts, it's the kind that reminds you just how much you've lost. I was 12 when my father first handed me a wrench and told me to listen to the metal. Back then, this yard was nothing but cracked asphalt, rusted trailers, and a whole lot of elbow grease holding everything together. But to him, it was more than just a place to park rigs. It was his proof that a man didn't have to be born into money to leave something behind. When he passed, I didn't inherit much, just the yard, a few aging trucks, and his southern sense of pride. I ran the place as best I could, keeping contracts alive with independent drivers, doing maintenance jobs on the side. But the industry slowed. Cost rose, people downsized. I let go of the fleet, sold off the trailers, and eventually the business dwindled to a pause. Still, I kept the land, paid the taxes, cleared the brush, patched the chain link. It wasn't just property, it was his, and now it was mine. My quiet, cracked slice of stubborn legacy. That's why the sight of unfamiliar tire tracks one Monday morning set my jaw tight. At first I figured someone had turned around in the yard. Happens sometimes, GPS sends people down the wrong road. But the next morning, there were 4 cars this time, parked near the fence like they belonged there. No notes, no calls, just sitting there bold as brass. I stood there staring, trying to make sense of it. By the end of the week, there were a dozen SUVs, sedans, a couple of minivans with baby on board decals curling off the windows. I checked my phone. No messages, no inquiries, nothing from the city. I walked the perimeter. No broken locks, no signs of forced entry. They'd just used it. Like it was a public lot. My jaw clenched tighter. Across the street, just past the edge of the fence, stood the new housing development. They'd gone up fast. Big stucco homes with stone veneers and 2-car garages that looked like they were copied and pasted from some developer's brochure. A little too clean. A little too perfect. And now, apparently, a little too crowded. That's when it clicked. The subdivision had overflowed too many cars, not enough space, and instead of fixing their own mess, someone decided to use my yard like it was part of their HOA budget. No call, no consent. Just convenience, neatly parked on my father's land. I stood there that Friday morning, boots planted in oil-stained gravel, watching a woman in yoga pants pop her trunk to load groceries into an Escalade. She didn't even glance in my direction, just slammed it shut, got in, and drove off with the kind of ease that said she'd done it before. I don't think I breathed for a full minute. I took a few steps forward and knelt by the front tire of a white Lexus. That patch of asphalt used to be where my father parked his cab after long hauls. I could still see the faded outline of the oil stain from where it used to sit. And now it was a parking lot for people who didn't even know who he was. I stood up slowly, brushing gravel from my knee, and felt something stir deep in my chest. Not rage, not yet. Something older, heavier, like a warning bell at the edge of a storm. They thought they could take without asking. They had no idea who they were messing with. She said it with charm, but her tone reeked of ownership. I didn't go in looking for a fight. I just wanted to find out who thought it was okay to treat private property like a community parking garage. So I cleaned myself up, put on a shirt that didn't smell like diesel, and walked across the street into the freshly built HOA office nestled between model homes and rose bushes, so well manicured it made my knuckles itch. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and money, neutral tones. A receptionist who smiled like she'd been trained to deflect complaints before they even finished forming. I asked to speak to whoever was in charge of parking arrangements. That's when I met Claudia Brent. She came out of the glass-walled conference room like she was stepping onto a stage, heels clicking, blonde bob motionless, and that smile already stretched across her face like a badge. "Mister," she asked, offering her hand like it was an act of grace. Wells, I said, shaking it. Owner of the trucking yard next door. Her smile didn't waver, but I saw it, just the smallest flicker of recognition in her eyes. She knew exactly who I was. Oh, that lot, she cooed, as if I'd reminded her of an old friend she barely tolerated. Yes, I've been meaning to reach out. It's just been so hectic with the new development and move-ins. I nodded slowly. I noticed quite a few of your residents have been parking on my property. Claudia laughed softly, like I'd said something adorable. Oh, I wouldn't say your property is being used, Mr. Wells. The space looked, well, unoccupied. Some of the folks assumed it was city-owned or just abandoned. I crossed my arms. It's neither. Her expression didn't change, but something behind it did, like a fox realizing the hen was still alive and kicking. Of course, she said smoothly. That's why I'm so glad you stopped by. This is a perfect opportunity to discuss how we can work together. You know, neighbors helping neighbors. I bit the inside of my cheek. I'm not looking for a partnership, I said. I'm looking for your residents to stop parking in my yard. Claudia stepped closer, voice honeyed. But it's just temporary. We've had some unexpected overflow issues, and with your yard sitting unused, it seemed like the simplest solution. It's really benefiting the whole community. There it was. That soft corporate chokehold of logic wrapped in courtesy. She didn't see me as a person, she saw a patch of land she could use without signing a check. I was a convenience she didn't expect to talk back. I didn't authorize it, I said, my voice low and steady. So it stops. Today. Claudia gave a smile so perfectly fake, it should have come with a copyright symbol. Well, I understand your perspective, but this might require some compromise. After all, your lot isn't being used for anything at the moment, and legally, it might take some time to establish. It's mine, I cut in. That's the only thing that needs to be established. A beat of silence passed. The receptionist pretended not to listen, but her eyes kept flicking over her monitor. Claudia straightened her blazer. We'll review the situation. Thank you for bringing your concerns to us, Mr. Wells. She said it like she was doing me a favor. Like she hadn't just tried to justify trespassing with a smile and a cinnamon-scented lobby. As I turned to leave, she called out, and do keep in mind, we want what's best for the community. I'm sure you do too. I didn't respond, because I already knew what this was. Not a misunderstanding. Not a mistake. It was a turf war, and I wasn't about to let her win it with a smirk and a clipboard. I did everything by the book. Turns out the book was written for her. I was raised to believe that if something wasn't right, you fixed it. No yelling, no threats, just process. Paper, patience. My father always said, let the truth do the talking. So I started with the zoning office. I explained the issue. Private land, unauthorized use, ongoing trespass. They promised to look into it, said it sounded like a civil matter. I offered to send pictures, license plates, timestamps, even footage from a motion sensor cam I'd installed. They told me to contact the police. So I did. The officer barely stepped out of the cruiser before giving me a sympathetic shrug. If they're not damaging property, it's not criminal, he said. Sounds like something the HOA needs to sort out. I almost laughed. The HOA was the problem. Next I posted signs, bold, red-lettered, private property, no parking. Vehicles will be towed. I nailed them into fresh wood, staked them deep, right along the entry. By the next morning, they were gone. Not blown away. Removed. Carefully, neatly. Like someone had peeled off my voice in the dead of night. So I put them back. This time with a trail cam aimed at the entrance. Got grainy footage of a man in a polo shirt, an HOA badge unscrewing one of the signs, and tossing it in the back of a golf cart. I took the clip to the precinct. The desk officer barely blinked. Still a civil matter. A week later, I called the mayor's office. Got passed from receptionist to voicemail to someone in community outreach. I left 4 messages. No one called back. Meanwhile, the parking got worse. 20 cars a day, easy. Some of them even left trash, Starbucks cups, crumpled grocery receipts, and in one case, a used diaper. They were treating the yard like a pit stop, like a dump. I started getting looks. Cold ones. The folks from the subdivision families who'd moved in less than 6 months ago stared me down when I stood near the lot. One woman rolled down her window and said, Why don't you just sell it already? It's an eyesore. An eyesore. That cracked asphalt had held my father's dreams together for 30 years. It put food on our table, paid for my boots, taught me how to work for something that was mine. But now it was just in the way of their barbecues and block parties. I started noticing the shift even in my own neighborhood. People I'd known for years, folks I'd helped jumpstart cars in winter or lent tools to, suddenly avoided eye contact. I wasn't the guy with the yard anymore. I was the guy causing trouble, the one getting in the way of progress. All because I wanted them to stop stealing. The worst part, Claudia never broke a sweat. She walked her dog past the yard every morning, smiled like she was running for office, waved like we were old friends. Her residents followed suit, like they'd learned from her how to ignore the man whose land they'd taken. And the system? It didn't care. The rules worked for people who could afford to bend them. That's when it hit me. I was trying to fight a chess match with a wrench. Every official I called, every sign I posted, it was like throwing pebbles at a brick wall. Claudia had a clipboard, a smile, and the city on speed dial. And me? I had a yard full of SUVs, and a history nobody seemed to care about. I hadn't lost yet, but I could feel it coming. Unless I changed the game. A towing bill turned into a paper trail and a scandal. Funny how a casual conversation over coffee can blow the lid off a scheme. I was sitting at a diner off Route 39, chewing over the bitterness in my eggs and my life, when an old friend slid into the booth. Mark DaCosta, contractor, sharp as a nail gun, used to do city permitting before he burned out and started flipping houses. "You still fighting with that HOA queen?" he asked, nodding toward the lot across the street. "Feels less like a fight and more like slow bleeding," I muttered. He stirred his coffee. "You ever check to see if she filed any land use extensions through the city?" I blinked. What? Developers do it all the time. Try to sneak in temporary access agreements when they know the oversight's weak. If your lot's being used in any official plans without your consent, that's a violation, and probably fraud. I didn't even finish my toast. Just left a 10 and drove straight to the planning department downtown. Took 2 hours of waiting and a half-dozen forms. But eventually, a clerk handed me a thick folder with my yard's parcel number. I took it to my truck and flipped through the copies in the cab with the engine idling. And there it was. A 3-page document from Brentwood Hills Homeowners Association, submitted 6 months ago, listing a temporary overflow use agreement for parking tied to their Phase 2 construction plan. The kicker? They included my lot in the site map. Right there in the visual appendix, outlined in dotted blue, labeled auxiliary residential parking. No notarization. No signature from me. Nothing that said I'd agreed. I flipped to the final page. It had Claudia's signature, dated 3 months before the first car showed up. No mention of my name, just a line that said, "Owner has been contacted, no formal objection filed." I felt my stomach drop. They didn't think I'd notice. Or maybe they thought I wouldn't know what to do if I did. Either way, this wasn't an accident. It was calculated, premeditated. A woman in a pantsuit with HOA authority had turned my yard into a lie on paper. The kind that smells like lawsuits and settlements if it sees daylight. And now I had proof. Real proof. Not tire tracks or trash or flimsy city shrugs. But documents, maps, fraudulent filings. I drove home in a fog. The folder in the passenger seat like a time bomb. My hands were tight on the wheel. My thoughts racing louder than the radio. All this time, I thought I was the one on the back foot, outmaneuvered, outnumbered. But now I was holding leverage. Claudia didn't just need my yard, she needed my silence. Because if word got out that the HOA had expanded their site plan onto private land without consent, she wouldn't just be embarrassed, she could be removed, sued, maybe worse. I pulled into the driveway and looked across the street at the subdivision, at the cars still lined up on my lot like soldiers in a stolen war. They weren't just trespassers anymore. They were evidence. And Claudia Brent had just made the first real mistake of her carefully manicured career. I could take the insults, but dragging my father's name, I'd been called stubborn, uncooperative, even paranoid. I could live with that. But when I heard what Claudia said at the HOA meeting, something inside me cracked so hard it never fit back together the same. It was a Tuesday evening. I wasn't invited to the meeting, obviously, but my phone lit at around 9:17 p.m. with a message from Keith, one of the few neighbors who hadn't turned their back completely. "You need to see this. She went too far." Attached was a video. It opened with the sterile cheer of folding chairs and coffee urns in the background. Claudia stood at the front of the room, sleeves rolled up like she'd just solved poverty herself. A few HOA board members sat behind her, nodding along like bobbleheads. "I understand many of you are concerned," she was saying, "but rest assured, we are taking every legal step to deal with the situation next door." She didn't say my name, not at first, but then came the words. "The owner of the trucking lot," she said, with a measured sigh, "has unfortunately been unstable in his responses. He's refused all our offers for cooperation. Some residents have reported harassment. It's not ideal, but we're exploring next steps, including a potential eminent domain process if the property continues to pose a blight on the neighborhood." Blight. She said it like she was scraping mold off a wall. Like my father's yard, the one he built with his hands and hope, was just a blemish on her landscape design. And she wasn't done. Keith had kept recording as the meeting ended, catching Claudia off mic as she laughed with one of the board members near the coffee table. "It'll be easier than I thought," she said, lifting a paper cup. "He doesn't have the money or the mouth. One push and he'll fold." I stared at my phone screen long after the video ended. She didn't just want to steal my land. She wanted to erase my story. Rewrite it like I was some angry old man in a lawn chair, yelling at clouds. A problem to be solved. An inconvenience to be outvoted. She could have just kept parking cars. She could have smiled and stayed silent. But Claudia Brent decided to slander a man who hadn't done a damn thing wrong, and worse, she dragged my father's name down with mine. She called the yard a blight. Said I was the danger. That night, I stood at the edge of the lot and looked out across the cracked pavement. My dad used to stand in that exact spot with a clipboard and a thermos, checking off arrival times like he was running a NASA launch. He didn't have much, but he was proud of what he built. And now some HOA tyrant with a fake laugh and a fraudulent permit wanted to bulldoze it for curb appeal. She wanted war. Fine. But I wasn't going to fight it with signs and phone calls anymore. Not with letters that went missing or rules bent to suit her. That playbook was hers. Let her keep it. I had my own ideas now. Something sharper. Something legal. Something final. I walked back inside, pulled out the manila folder from the passenger seat of my truck, and flipped through every page again. Her name, her signature, her lies. I smiled for the first time in weeks. She thought I was alone. She thought I was weak. She thought wrong. I let her think I was giving up, and she gave me everything I needed. The first rule of getting even: make 'em think they've already won. So I went quiet. No more calls to zoning. No more signs hammered into the ground. No more pacing the edge of the lot like a watchdog on a chain. I disappeared from the battlefield, and Claudia mistook it for surrender. That was her first mistake. A week after the HOA meeting, I crossed the street and knocked on their office door with the kind of nervous smile you learn to fake in war. Claudia answered in pastel pink like she was heading to brunch, not orchestrating a land grab. "Mr. Wells," she said, brows arching like she smelled blood in the water. "What a surprise." "I've been thinking," I told her, rubbing the back of my neck. "Maybe I've been too rigid. I'm open to discussing options now. You know, maybe selling." She blinked, just once, then smiled so wide it almost cracked her lip gloss. "Oh, I think that's very wise." I nodded. "I'm tired of the fight." That was only half a lie. Over the next 2 weeks I played the part. Attended one HOA subcommittee meeting. Asked Quince about property valuation. Even said I might be willing to work something out for the good of the neighborhood. And Claudia, she ate it up, started talking freely, dropped hints about the Phase 3 expansion. Even gave me copies of outdated site plans. Plans that still had my yard marked as part of future resident parking. Her confidence was so thick it fogged her judgment. But while she thought I was daydreaming about retirement, I was busy watching, listening, collecting. I installed 2 discrete cameras, one disguised in an old electrical box on the fence, the other hidden beneath a busted light pole. They caught everything: daily foot traffic, HOA staff directing people to park, One guy in khakis physically moving cones to make room for a birthday party. I went through old emails, digging up every reply I'd received from zoning, parking enforcement, and the planning board. Every dismissive phrase. Every brush off. I made a timeline, matched it with the documents Claudia gave me. The contradictions practically highlighted themselves. Then I called Marcus. Marcus works in the Department of Transportation. Used to drive long haul before he got into regulatory compliance. Knows the system better than the people who built it. I told him what was going on, sent him the documents. He didn't speak for a while after reading. "Wells," he said finally, "they screwed up." "How bad?" "Commercial code violation. They're using your private land for unlicensed overflow tied to a non-commercial permit. If you file a complaint under the state DOT ordinance, the vehicles can be removed immediately. No waiting, no debate." I felt the slow burn of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. "I'll keep it quiet," he added, "but when you're ready, give me the green light." I thanked him and hung up, my fingers gripping the phone like a lever that could flip everything. Claudia didn't know. Not yet. She was too busy congratulating herself. She stopped waving fake friendly across the street. She didn't need to anymore. In her mind, I was boxed in, folding quietly into the role of the defeated neighbor. Maybe even grateful for a buyout. That was her second mistake. Because while she planned my erasure, I was engineering her downfall. Here is section 7. The night the engines came for them. 600 words. Written in a tone that is grimly satisfying, focused, and coldly methodical. As the narrator finally executes the plan, with precision and restraint, delivering justice on his terms. At 2:04 a.m., the first tow truck backed into my lot like a war drum. The night air was thick, still, the kind of quiet that hums before something shifts for good. I stood at the edge of the lot in the dark, coffee cooling in my hand, jacket zipped up to my throat. I'd barely slept, not out of nerves, but anticipation. The kind that comes when you've sharpened every piece of the trap, and all that's left is to watch it spring. At exactly 2:04 a.m., headlights cut through the fog. The first flatbed turned in slow, its orange hazard lights flickering like fireflies. Behind it came a second, then a third. 6 in total, each one driven by professionals. All of them escorted by a plain white DOT vehicle marked with state decals. It wasn't a raid, it wasn't a circus. It was a sweep, surgical, silent. Marcus had filed the DOT commercial violation on my behalf the day before. I'd signed off on the documents personally. Everything was lined up, paper trail, timestamps, permits. This was no ambush. This was law, and the law was on my side. One by one, the trucks positioned themselves like chess pieces around the lot. The drivers worked fast. License plates were documented. Tires were chalked. Digital logs were entered into state databases. No damage. No drama. Just hook, lift, and gone. By the time the first residents realized what was happening, 5 cars were already en route to the impound. A man in slippers and pajama pants came running across the street yelling, "Hey, that's my car." One of the DOT officers calmly pointed to the posted violation orders, now zip-tied to the gate. Another woman shouted at me from her porch, asking if I knew anything about this. I just sipped my coffee. At 2:47 a.m., Claudia arrived. She wasn't dressed for war this time. Just a gray robe cinched too tightly and designer flats that didn't quite fit the gravel. She looked less like a commander and more like someone who'd been woken from a dream she no longer controlled. "Mr. Wells," she said, marching across the lot like she still owned the room. I didn't speak, just tilted my head toward the clipboard in the DOT officer's hand. Her eyes scanned it. She blinked. Once, twice. This is a mistake," she said, voice catching. "You can't just tow people's vehicles." I spoke for the first time. "I didn't. The state did. You used commercial property without permission. Repeatedly. It's all in the filing." "But you said you were considering options?" I nodded. "I was. Then I found better ones." She turned to the DOT officer. "This will cause a serious disruption to our community." He barely looked up. "Take it up with the commissioner, ma'am. We're just executing the order." By 3:31 a.m., the last car was gone. The lot was empty, clean, silent. just like it had been before they turned it into their dumping ground. I stood alone as the last tow truck pulled away, taillights vanishing into the mist. Claudia stayed frozen near the fence, arms crossed over her chest like she was trying to hold in the pieces of her composure. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched. Because this wasn't revenge. It wasn't petty. It was earned. Every lie she told, every smug little meeting, every name she called me, it all led here. And now, there was nothing left for her to take. She didn't scream, she just stared like a queen realizing the peasants had revolted. You'd think a woman like Claudia would go down swinging. I half expected her to rally the troops, file some bogus injunction, call in every favor she had left. But when the final card disappeared from my lot and the state paperwork dried in black ink, something in her dimmed. Not all at once. Just quietly. At first, she tried to play it off like a misunderstanding. Sent out a neighborhood email the next day titled Clarification on Overnight Towing Incident. Claimed there had been a communications breakdown and that the HOA had been working diligently with the property owner. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because by then, the residents had questions. Lots of them. Why hadn't they been told the lot wasn't actually public? Why had their vehicles been at risk of impound fees? Why were some now facing citations for trespassing on private commercial land? And then someone, probably Keith, leaked the folder. The real one. The copy of the falsified land use form with Claudia's signature. The HOA permit filings that listed my yard without my name. The meeting minutes where she casually stated the owner was being difficult, even though I'd never agreed to a thing. It spread like fire on a windy day. Residents who once waved at Claudia from their driveways suddenly started avoiding her eye. A mother who'd screamed at me weeks ago over a towed minivan now walked her stroller past my lot in silence, her gaze heavy with something that looked a lot like regret. Within days, HOA forum threads lit up with calls for accountability. Words like overreach, liability, and impeachment got thrown around in all caps. I heard the emergency meeting was held on a Thursday night. I didn't go. Didn't need to. Keith texted me the next morning. Anonymous vote. She's out. No parade. No police tape. Just a quiet resignation and a replacement with less lip gloss and more caution. Claudia Brent, the woman who once walked past my lot like it was her private driveway, stopped appearing at community events altogether. I saw her once after that. She was walking her dog near the edge of the subdivision. Sunglasses too big for her face. Posture a little less certain. Our eyes met for a split second. She didn't nod. Didn't smile. She just looked at me blank, brittle, like someone trying to solve a puzzle they used to think was simple. And me? I didn't say a word. Not out of spite. Not even out of pride. Because by then it wasn't about her anymore. It was about the silence I finally earned. The kind that didn't buzz with disrespect or clench with injustice. The kind of quiet my father once found between long-haul shifts, standing at the edge of the yard, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over his own damn land. Poetic justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it just comes with the slow crumble of a paper empire, undone by its own arrogance. She built her kingdom on assumptions and signatures she didn't own. And in the end, it wasn't rage that brought her down. It was truth. And truth doesn't need to shout. They thought it was just a parking lot. I knew it was the last piece of my father I had. There's something sacred about silence when it's the right kind. The kind that settles in after a long war. The kind that doesn't ache with injustice or hewn with resentment. Just stillness. Pure and earned. That's what the yard sounded like the morning after Claudia fell. No SUVs, no soccer moms, no garbage in the gravel. Just wind in the chain link and the creak of the old gate as I pushed it open. I stepped through like I was returning to hallowed ground. Not just because it was finally empty, but because it was finally mine again. No strings, no threats, no one pretending it belonged to them because they dressed the part or filed the wrong paperwork with a confident smile. I ran my hand along the cold metal of the fence, noting every scratch and dent, each one a reminder of time, of fights won and lost, of trucks that once rumbled through and now only echoed in memory. I started fixing things. Not out of obligation, but out of pride. Replaced the busted locks, reinforced the corner posts, painted over the old graffiti tags that had weathered into ghosted outlines. I pulled weeds from the gravel and patched the potholes one by one, like a man restoring a forgotten shrine. Then I did the one thing that had been long overdue. I ordered a new plaque. Bronze, solid, no nonsense. Built by grit. Maintained by pride. I mounted it on a concrete base right at the front gate, beneath the old floodlight. When the sun hits it at noon, the whole thing glows like it's been waiting for this day. And maybe it had. Funny thing is, once word got around that the yard was no longer up for grabs, my phone started ringing. 2 local hauling contractors asked if I had space to lease for storage. A local landscaper wanted a section to park trailers during off hours. Not big jobs, but honest ones. Real ones. The kind that don't come with lawsuits or phony permits. I took a few, not because I needed the money, but because it felt right. Because use is different than abuse. And I finally had the power to choose. Most days I just sit out there for a while. Same spot my dad used to stand. Coffee in hand, boot on the concrete slab, watching the light shift across the asphalt. Remembering, he never raised his voice. My old man never went looking for trouble. But he knew how to hold the line when it mattered. He taught me that without ever saying it outright. Turns out that lesson was buried deeper in me than I thought. This fight was never just about property. It wasn't even about Claudia, not really. It was about something bigger, something they never saw because they were too busy seeing a cracked lot and assuming it meant weakness. That this land was never empty. It was full of memory, of work, of stubbornness, of us. They tried to erase that with a few signatures and a smirk. They failed. And as I stand here now, breathing in the smell of fresh sealant and oil, watching a pair of legitimate contractors unload equipment under the rising sun, I realize I didn't just win a case. I kept something no one can ever take from me again. So if anyone ever asks what this yard is worth, I'll tell them this. It's not for sale, not now, not ever. Because it's not just land, it's legacy. And I know exactly how to protect it. Ever had something stolen in plain sight, just because they thought you wouldn't fight back? Then you already know what this story feels like. Stick with us, we've got more real grit, quiet revenge, and justice served cold. Because some battles aren't loud, but they leave scars that speak volumes.